Hey everybody, Pat Fenner here with You Can Homeschool. And today we are so excited to have a guest speaker, a guest interview. Danika Kopp is a social worker who has had over 20 years of experience, and she deals with specifically kind of focuses on adolescents, which if you've been listening to the podcast and you know me, that is my jam. I love having teens and getting to homeschool them and help launch them and just help, be on the front row as they discover their future. And it's just exciting to have Danika here because I know that, I know that we are going to have some wonderful tips and quotes and insights that you'll be able to learn from today. So welcome, Danika. And I know that was a very skeleton introduction, but I was hoping that you would introduce yourself to our listeners and give us a little background about yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So as you said, my name is Danika, and I am a licensed master's level clinical social worker. So I have gone through grad school for social work and then worked to get licensed. And most of my clinical practice has been with adolescents. So that has been kind of my specialty. I've always enjoyed that population, and I think partially because I didn't enjoy being that population. So kind of being a beacon for them has always been something that I've, kind of taken pride in. And so now, after doing over 20 years of clinical experience with the adolescents in my therapy office, I've realized that there's a lot their parents don't know. So at this point now, I'm looking to kind of switch over a little bit and kind of work with parents on how to successfully launch their kids, because I'm finding that there's a lot of teenagers nowadays that aren't getting the skills they need. And I think just, through being so tech centric in today's world, and then also, that we're so busy kind of trying to, do our best for them. But in doing that, we kind of micromanage them and don't really allow them to then have that same experience that maybe you and I had back many years ago. Yeah.
Just go back
where we were kind of on our own, making it work in the world, riding our bikes till the streetlights came on.
Oh my gosh, that's right. Absolutely. And just like not coming home for lunch and nobody panicking. I know.
Right. Yep.
Exactly. It just kind of amazes me because I was thinking back to something that you'd said triggered a memory for me too, that thinking back to when I was a teenager and realizing my parents didn't get it. And that just really seems to be a cyclical thing. Like, how do we forget that as parents? I do realize, similar to you, I didn't, I actually remember when I was a teenager, begging my folks, please, let's go to family counseling. Our home was very chaotic, and being an adult child of an alcoholic, that kind of is a characteristic of it. And absolutely. I remember like begging them to get, like, let's go to counseling together. This can't be right. This can't be right. And then, growing up and being a parent and then realizing as I'm parenting my kids, I forget a lot of that stuff. And
it's easy to do. I think, we are experts, right? We've lived through it. We survived. You'll survive too. And so we just kind of throw that at them. And I think that lacks the empathy that our teenagers really need, to really connect with them, to go back to what it was like to be in those shoes, to go back to feeling like you know it all, but knowing now from our experience as adults that you really don't.
Well, I think even at the time, even though we feel and we put off these vibes of, we've got it all together, we know, I think that inside, at least for me, I'm speaking from my experience, there was the core of me that knew I didn't, but, but was afraid to reveal that because my environment didn't feel safe. And so, you didn't want to reveal that, hey, I have some cracks here, because you didn't know how it was going to be received. So I don't want to dwell on, negative things here. I do want to leave things, positive for people. So, but if you can relate to any of this, as you're listening to this, that, you may have gone through, it might not have been anything, trauma as a teenager, but just the usual traumas of adolescence.
We call those the little T traumas, not the major T traumas, but just the little T traumas that affect us through life.
Right. And you're here today because you want to do better. So So Danika's going to help us do that. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
So we're talking about expectations today, I guess at different levels, because some people listening to this don't have parents of teenagers, even though God willing, we all will get there someday, as long as, if we have kids. So let's start from the beginning though. So when kids are, I don't know how young you want to start, what kind of expectations are realistic for, and you fill in the age range there.
Sure. Well, so I even want to roll it back to when you think about creating a family, right? Initially it starts off with it's a couple.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a cycle that a family goes through where, first of all, you decide to kind of become a couple to, be a two.
Mm-hmm.
And then you make that decision to add children to make it a family.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go through the cycle of raising your children. So there's the family of a young child is very different from the family of school age children, is very different from the family of adolescent children. And certainly if you have children at multiple stages, then you're a family that's, kind of engaged in multiple different kind of areas of this.
Right.
But then ultimately, your family cycle is this kind of orbiting globe around each other, where eventually then the parents who were the couple became the family now become the empty nesters as that young child becomes the adult and kind of goes off to become a couple.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this constant growth cycle that we're in. And I think sometimes parents get stuck in, I don't want to let my kid go. And if we don't let our kid go, we don't complete that cycle that we're in, nor do we allow them to launch into their own cycle where they're going to kind of orbit, right?
And ironically, though, the stereotype of the 35-year-old who comes back and lives in mom's basement, is not a good one. I mean,
it's not.
It's not.
Right.
And so there's that thing, like, you don't really want, it's hard to let go, but
yes.
However, you don't really want them to come back. You want to have an adult relationship with them. And
absolutely.
That's what we're talking about, how that develops over the life cycle of I love that concept of the life cycle of a family. That's awesome.
Yes. And so allowing, each cycle to kind of, it's a constant, we're always kind of going through this, like, and if you look at like multi-generational families, like my mother was one of 7. So there's a 16-year age gap between my mom, who is the oldest, and the youngest. So, where I'm at is very different from where my youngest aunt is, where her child is. Like we're kind of like half generation apart. Right. So you can really see kind of those different like launching cycles kind of in families when you have larger families like that. And my parents kind of becoming grandparents, whereas, my youngest cousin was still like in elementary school. I mean, I used to babysit her. So, we're constantly kind of circling through this and recognizing that this is a very normal process, right? That launching children into the world has been done for hundreds of years, thousands of years, millions of years, right? Like as long as humans have existed, we've been launching our children. And so the thought that like, yes, your child is incredibly special and incredibly perfect in your child, but that they are also going to be okay. And how do you allow them to be okay? Mm-hmm. So part of that is laying out, what does success look like? So I think in a lot of families, like we don't really talk about what is success. We just kind of assume in the background they know. So I know, and when I was growing up, my parents both have master's degrees. So it was always like, you're going to college. Like that was never a choice. It was like, you finish high school, you go to college. And so I knew all throughout growing up, like, which college am I looking at? Which college am I going to? Like, it was never a choice about, will I go to college? It was which college.
Yeah, right.
And I think that sometimes nowadays we either get too stuck on the college, which is really hard on kids because the college may very well not be the right college.
Yeah.
And we don't look at other options. And there are so many other options, that in some families, going on mission trips or, getting married or, learning a trade or, getting a full-time job, that there are so many different paths to success. It's not just a path to college. And quite frankly, right now, trades are so needed and huge, especially for kids who are not great academically. So I think being able to sit down and kind of talk with your child around, like, what does success look like for you as parents? And how does your child's skill set and interests fit into that? So my parents always said, like, if I wasn't a great student, they would have explored like cosmetology school or something else with me. But they knew that I had the aptitude to go to college. So it was always kind of college, you
Now,
know.
this is a brief aside, a little bit of
Yeah.
aside, but how would you, do you have any insights or suggestions if the parents aren't together on this? You know, say one parent says,
Sure.
oh yeah, college, you know, and not only college, like engineering, and the other parent's like, well, you know, maybe not. How would you suggest handling that if you're stuck in that area?
So I think some of that needs to come back to the child and their interests. You know, if the kid has no interest in engineering, like the kid's not going to do well in engineering.
Right.
You know, that's a pretty specific, you know, and so I think, you know, again, looking at, and this is where being able to, when children are younger, kind of explore like, what are your interests? And I find this in my counseling office, you know, kids would come in, you know, juniors and seniors, and I would say like, okay, like we need to be thinking about your future. What do you want to do? And so many of them, like, I want to be a CSI, or I want to be a forensic, you know, like a profiler. Right. Which great. You know, there's some cool TV shows that have those on them, which is why they want to do that. And so I'll say like, what about that field interests you? Well, you know, I love science and I love crime. And I think it's so cool to be able to work with like, you know, serial killers. Oh, okay. Great. Like, I'm not here to rain on anybody's parade. Like, I want to support anybody's dream.
Right.
Have you talked to anybody who does that job? Because usually in our head, how we imagine that job looks like is not what that job is day to day.
Absolutely, especially if it's something that we discovered from television.
Correct. So I'm always curious, you know, I always say to kids, like, why don't you look up people who are doing that? Like, I know in my profession, I'm always thrilled to talk to anybody who's interested in doing what I do. You know, who wants to interview me for 10 or 15 minutes, kids in social work school who want to, you know, explore, you know, how did I end up where I'm at? I love talking to them because I think it's so critical to our development. And I did that to determine what I wanted to do as a career.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's any adults out there that if a high schooler reached out and said, hey, I'm interested in what you do. Can you tell me more? You know, how did you get there? What did you study? You know, what jobs did you take to kind of build your way up? Like, nobody becomes a profiler.
Right.
You start somewhere.
So let's go back to where you started, because I think I kind of pulled you up the rabbit trail.
No worries.
So when our kids are younger, so this is elementary school, how managing that part of the life cycle, what kind of things, what are some practical things that we can do to help eventually launch our kids, you know, help our kids get ready?
So chores, expectations of them around the house. Like, when we do everything for them, they don't learn how to adult. You know, kids who have never done dishes, who have never heated up a meal, who have never set a table, who've never cleared a table, you know, vacuuming, like the minor things, collecting their dishes out of their room, or, you know, picking up their toys. You know, we set up expectations for kids when they are very young. My daughter at 18 months started helping us to feed the dog because she wanted to. And so, you know, at that age, they want to help. So you give her the scoop and you let her put it in the bowl and tell the dog it's time to eat. And that became her chore. Basically, you know, she's 20 now. So, you know, go ahead.
You know, you said something really you just kind of flew by with that, but the minor things.
Yes.
And I think, you know, yes, they seem minor, and especially as we're, you know, starting them off on the chore kind of thing. But I also think of, you know, when you're living with someone, for example, one of the things you said where, you know, putting your dishes in the sink. Well, when you live with someone who never does that, it quickly becomes major. It moves from the minor to the major category. So I think sometimes we make a big deal out of life skills and think, well, they're too fluffy. That's not really something that we you know, we should be teaching, or we can teach, or should be taught. They should just pick up on that. But, you know, no.
Well, I mean, you know, you don't learn that unless that's an expectation. You just don't. You know, in the same way, the kids nowadays who are so into this, they don't know how to have a conversation, right? They don't know how to look you in the eye, and like, it's terrifying. Yes. And so we have to train them on how to do that. And they don't just know, that's not a natural skill they just pick up, especially if the natural skill they're picking up is being on the screen, not having to look at people.
Right. And I do have to point out that homeschooling does benefit that, because very often, now I know the pandemic has put us all in a wonky thing, but traditionally homeschooling includes a lot of volunteer work, interacting with different ages
Yes.
in different situations and stuff. And I have found my experience in 25 years of homeschooling is that even with the digital age that we're in, that by virtue of interacting with other people, and then it becomes normal.
I agree.
Even if it's just your kids' friends talking to you, it's amazing how that is
Correct.
skill that traditionally schooled kids don't have.
Oh, absolutely. Speaking to other adults.
Yeah,
You are 100% right. And I could 100% agree with you on that with homeschool kids.
that's
Yes.
amazing. But
Yep.
but it hasn't been caught. Still, at the same time, I would agree with you that it still has been something that's taught, because as we have our kids go into these different situations and environments, we are teaching them how to interact. Go ahead, go
Yes.
shake her hand. She's the one who'll be leading us around. If you have any questions, go to her, kind of thing.
Correct.
Mhm.
Correct. Yeah. You don't just throw them in the situation and assume they know.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, it's as simple as, when we moved, my daughter was 6 from Massachusetts to Virginia, and, having her go to the playground and what will you say to new kids? Like, hi, my name's Abby. Do you want to play? Like, just go up to anybody your age, your size. Hi, my name's Abby. Do you want to play? Like, that's such a simple skill, but kids aren't taught that.
Right.
Kids returning to school, I know you're doing more homeschool, but, returning post-pandemic and having been isolated, like forgetting how to, how do you interact with somebody? Like, just as simple as, hey.
Well, I mean, I'm an adult, and I have to tell you that I kind of embraced my inner introvert during this past year. And I feel sometimes when I'm going back out that I'm relearning it, and I've been doing it a lot longer, so
absolutely.
Of course, our kids may have some problem with that, because it's a process, and it's, what's that saying, use it or lose it.
Yes, it's a muscle that's got to be developed and used. Yep.
Yep. So basically, what you're suggesting is, starting chores early, and having the expectation that that's going to be part of what they do to contribute to the family.
Yes. To not kind of do everything for them, thinking that you're making it easier for them. You're absolutely not ultimately making it easier for them.
And you're not making it easier for you either. Like it.
No.
I will confess to, especially with my 2 older ones, because we have a big 9-year difference between the second and third. But my 2 older ones, I used to say, "Oh, it's just easier if I do it myself." Well, okay, at that moment it might be.
Mm-hmm.
But not when they're old enough to be doing it, and they're not doing it.
Yep. And you're not making them a good partner down the road, or a good roommate, or anything else.
That's right. Yeah.
Yep. Sure.
So that can start early. And then how would that kind of morph, say, as kids are getting into middle school age?
So I really think at middle school age, they should begin to start to have some kind of input into activities, into friends, and chores, and that, to really kind of give them a little bit of a voice at that point. Mm-hmm. Because again, we're trying to get our kids, by the time they're in high school, where they're fairly independent. Mm-hmm. Because it's not very far till college, or till they're launching, that they're out of your house. Right. So middle school is really kind of a time to start to let them kind of have a voice, and not talk back, but kind of have a discussion around, they want to do, they would like to be able to go to the skate park, and be alone, not supervised. Okay, well, here are my concerns about, lack of supervision. Like, these are the things that I worry could happen, and then let them kind of think about, well, how will I, come back to you with, here's how I'll handle that. If anybody starts to act in a way that I know isn't appropriate, I'll text you, or, and like, a lot of families will have like a code, like if your kid texts X, mm-hmm. Like that, you call them and say, you need to come home immediately. I've always said to my daughter, I will forever be your bad guy. If you're ever in a situation, let me be your bad guy. I need you home now.
Right. Same thing. Yeah. We've done that.
Yep. And I've also always said to my kid, I don't care where you are, you call me. I'm always going to be your first call, no matter where you're at, what trouble you're in. I'm your mom. I'm your biggest fan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm your biggest cheerleader. I'm the one that's going to care the most to get you out of whatever you're in. That's so right. Call me, and I'll come deal with it, and we'll worry about it once we're safe and once it's a new situation.
I love that phrase that you used. You said, here are the concerns I have. So if they ask to
Yes.
go, whatever, because, you're not saying, when you put it that way, you're not saying, I don't trust you. And you're not saying you don't trust their friends either, because that can
Correct.
be insulting too. Like, I'm going to meet my best friend. You don't trust them,
Right.
who I'm hanging out with. You don't trust my ability to decide and discern. So,
Yep.
but just to put it on you. Well, my concerns are
absolutely.
this, and then they
when kids get together, they tend to get pack mentality, and they tend to get into doing things that aren't safe. That it's so much easier to do more dangerous skate park activities when it's just the kids and no parents around. How are you going to kind of, stop and think, I can't put you back together if you're broken.
Right.
Why it's important to wear a helmet.
Yeah. That's true. But that's good. I think that's helpful to just, put it on you if you have to.
Absolutely. And I also think, again, you're trying to help your child to problem solve, right? When we think about even launching into teenage years, when our kids end up in situations that they know are unsafe, and they're just like, and they're kind of frozen. Like, I want my child to have problem solved those situations. So what will happen if you end up in a party that, your friends, you thought you were going to the movies and you end up at a party because you were just in the car? Like, now what do? What happens if somebody offers you alcohol? What happens if somebody offers you drugs? Like, how are you going to handle that? Because when you problem solve ahead of time, your child isn't just like, okay, yeah. They're able to then say, oh, hey, I worked through this. I can't not wear a helmet at the skate park. My mom will kill me. And, sometimes she checks on me, like, great.
Say that.
That's a great response. Yep. I can't, in my family, drugs are like a huge no. My mom will kill me, and she's super aware of everything. I just can't. Great.
Because eventually they do find their own voice.
They do.
But in the beginning, it might require that, to make parents a bad guy. And honestly, in situations like that, I'm with you. I'll be the bad guy any day,
all day long. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. But the important thing is for them to remember that when they get home, it's not an antagonistic relationship.
Correct.
I'm the bad guy to help you.
Correct. Well, and ideally they're going to come home and, and be able to say, like, hey, I was in that situation where, I ended up at a party that I didn't expect to be, and I was offered drugs, here's what I did. And, thank you. Like, oh, I'm so proud of you. Like, that must've been so hard, kind of reinforcing, that relationship, and even just hugging them. Like, oh, I'm so proud of you,
That's super important. If you're listening to this, go back and just listen again, what you just said, because it's really easy. And I think, most of the time it comes out of a good place, we're concerned for it. But I think it's kind of like the initial reaction. If your kid comes back, it's, gosh, I was at a party and they were doing drugs. And your initial thing is, you are never going to see them again. That's it. Who are their parents? I'm calling, or some kind of punitive thing, which just builds the tense environment in the first place and doesn't really encourage them to want to continue talking to you.
That completely closes that connection.
Absolutely. And to be able, oh my gosh, to be able to just go up to them and hug them and say, wow, I'm so glad you got through that. I'm so proud of you, all that stuff. And then you can go in your room and say, oh my gosh, Sarah.
Right. That's what your partner's for. Yes. And even later you can say to them, like, wow, like, I was really struggling, but I'm so proud of you. Like, I mean, I think it's okay to say that to your kid down the road too.
Oh,
because I want us to be real.
And
you are your initial. Yes. And you definitely need to let them know, because again, you want to open up that interaction. You want them to feel safe coming to you in the future. Right. You want to be that person.
Absolutely. And, think about all the times that you say something negative. Well, how many times do you say something positive too? And that's probably more important, because I think
absolutely.
What do they say? For every 6 or 7 negative things, you need to counteract. Oh no, for every one negative thing, you have to counteract it with 6 or 7 positive. And sadly, I probably, don't quite make it.
Right.
I
think, it is really important, like, to thank your child for doing their chores, to, recognize, like, I appreciate, that, to not just have that expectation, that we can thank them for that. And that's a positive thing,
Mhm, mhm. Do you have any insights for like sometimes teenagers kind of have this attitude like, hey, I've got it. We mentioned that a little earlier. But when you're trying to have those conversations, helping your teen, kind of walk through or work through a decision, and their response is, I don't, Mom, I got that. I'm good. I wouldn't do that. I'm not an idiot. And they kind of get dismissive over it because how would you pursue that conversation a little bit without being insulting? Because you don't want to insult your kids and say, well, I want to talk about it because I'm not sure how you would decide.
Right.
But they're teens and they, this is part of your job as a parent. And you do want to just make sure things are going well. How would you pursue that without coming across as insulting?
So I might not pursue it in that exact moment, because in that exact moment, this teenager's already kind of defensive and kind of hackles her up. So I might kind of just let it go then, but it probably would be something I would revisit probably in the car when I'm driving. So driving is the best time to kind of revisit anything with a teen, because you don't have to look at each other. So I might kind of say, hey, the other day when I mentioned, about, what would you do if you were in the party situation, you got kind of defensive, and I get it. Like, it's hard to talk about, but I just want to hear more about like what you're thinking and what would you do? And, how can I best support you? That's just all I want to, so I think I would kind of just put it there, that I'm here for you. I like to say, I do remember what it was like to be a teenager. And I really encourage parents, like, think back to your like real pain points of being a teenager. Like, what were those situations where you just were like, oh my God, like this sucks. Like your heart's broken. You weren't invited to the party. You weren't part of the group that got to get together to do whatever. Think of those pain points from high school. And I can remember for me some significant pain points that, there was a Halloween party freshman year that I remember distinctively, where everybody came and they came as babies and they all went out in the woods to drink. And I just had no interest in alcohol and drugs. I'd had a friend in middle school had gotten involved and it scared the crap out of me. And so in high school, when all my friends were heading out to the woods, and these were the popular kids that I then basically shunned because I didn't want to go. And I called my dad from a payphone begging him to come pick me up because I was sick. And he was like, you're fine, because he knew I didn't want to go to this high school. And he gave me a really hard time until I got home and said, Dad, they were all going to the woods to drink and I didn't want to go. And my mother was like, from now on, if she ever calls, you go get her, no questions asked. Like, she's making good decisions.
Yeah.
But like, I shunned the popular kids. That really didn't set me up for the best high school experience, when I then was kind of on the fringe now with this group that I'd been friends with them playing sports my whole life, but I did not want to party.
Yeah.
And so that's a real pain point for me, knowing how what was ultimately a really good choice, but really cemented my high school career.
Yeah.
October of freshman year, how I was going to, interact with the popular kids, and basically not participate with them.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, that set me up for a whole different track. I think that had I just gone and drank or not drank, I don't know.
Right.
But so I think
either way, like it would have been either inauthentic, you just would have, would have been just totally facade, but it could have been worse, like you really could have gone, who knows what it led to. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
So I think as parents, we need to really remember those pivotal moments of our own adolescence. And I think, we want to look back and see those as we survived, we're fine, everybody goes through them. Yes. But do you remember how pivotal they were when you were there? Like when you're in that moment, that didn't feel like, oh, I'm going to get through this and everything will work out. Like it felt like this was like a game changer.
Oh, sometimes like the end of the world, like we say that flippantly, or, well, it's not the end of the world, but it feels like that sometimes. I mean, at
your 14 years of experience, it is, right? I mean, that was social suicide.
Yeah, right. So now how would you, now I'm going to pivot for a second here, because the flip side of that coin. Okay. So there's those parents who are like, oh, toughen up. You did fine. I lived through it too. But then there are on the other side of the coin, those parents who are like, oh, I remember how horrible that was. I'd hate for you. I don't want you to ever feel that kind of pain, and try to protect their kids from everything. it's kind of a fine line, isn't it?
It is a fine line, because if we try to protect our kids from everything, then how do we allow them to be adults who can make it in the world when things are hard?
Right.
And so, yes, like heartbreaks happen. We can't protect our kids or our adults from heartbreak.
Right.
We don't always get our first choice of classes, chair, team, school, job. Like sometimes we don't get what we want, and sometimes beautiful things come out of what we thought was not the right road.
Yeah.
And so trusting that it's the journey that matters, not the end result or this part of that result. Like it's the whole journey of life is what really matters.
Right. That's so true. It's funny, when our oldest daughter was younger, we were in an area, a church and a school environment where all the girls were these cute little blondes, they're little sweet, and she was, olive skin and dark hair like me. And she was not, let's just say she was not embraced. And she spent a lot of years, and she's a very social person. And she spent a lot of years really struggling with friendships. She is, I'm the kind of person that needs one or two good friends.
Yes.
She's the kind of person who needs a lot of good friends. And she was good friends with them, and she likes groups. Well, she didn't have them, and it was really hard as a parent to watch. But now I see what a strong individual it made her. And there are stories of her, things she did in college where she totally bucked the status quo and what peers would have had her, do or behave, whatever, because she realized that it wasn't for her. It wasn't necessary to have the appreciation or the acceptance by peers, that she had her own standard, and that's what was important.
Absolutely.
And so I can totally relate to what you're saying about, even the tough things. Well, the tough things are what build character. That's,
Absolutely. 100%. Yep. I mean, our greatest growth comes from failure. And so when we don't allow our children to fail, we're really not allowing them to grow.
Absolutely. Oh, that's good. That's really good. Yeah. So tell us, do you have any information that our listeners could access that would just help them kind of on managing this life? I love the life cycle concept of the family, but managing expectations during that. And do you have anything for us?
Absolutely. So I have my free adolescent launching checklist, which has over 75 tasks that teenagers kind of need to, quote, make it in the world. And it is broken into like health areas, kind of household areas, financial areas, but kind of just a checklist of all things that kids kind of need to know to kind of go out and be the adults in the world. And that's free, available at confidentlylaunchyourteen.com.
And I'll have the link for that too, show notes. But
perfect. Yes. And then, yes, I would love to anybody who wants kind of to work with me on kind of launching their kids. I'm developing a coaching program. And at this point, you can work one-on-one with me. So definitely just reach out and you will have my contact information. And I would love to work with anybody who's interested.
And I want to put a personal endorsement for her Instagram. You got to follow her on Instagram. She's just really like Danika's, just offers a lot of practical, kind of help on Instagram and stuff. And so you got to, I would suggest go follow her and learn some parent smarter, not harder.
Absolutely. Yeah. So on Instagram, it's just Danika Kopp MSW.
Yep. All right. Well, Danika, thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.
I could have talked with you for a lot longer, but we're kind of got to wrap this up now. And so folks, I hope you have found a nugget or two at the very least that can help you in your parenting. And of course, reach out to Danika or Tracy or I if you have any kind of questions or comments, or just need some information or some help or encouragement along the way. That's what we're here for.
Amen. Thank you.
In the meantime, we will see y'all next week, and just leave you with the reminder that Tracy's always given us, you can homeschool and it can be a fabulous choice. So take care, everybody. And thanks again, Danika. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.